There's this weird moment that starts happening as you get older, where you realize an entire month disappeared and you genuinely cannot explain where it went. You look at the calendar and somehow it's already May, or you're halfway through things you still mentally associate with just starting. And your brain kind of resists it for a second because internally it still feels like time should be slower than this. What's strange is that everyone seems to notice this eventually. People always say time flies, but when you're younger, it doesn't really land because time actually feels slow back then. A school year felt like a huge stretch of life. Waiting for the weekends felt long. Waiting for birthdays felt even longer. Even a random weekday had its own identity, like it actually stood out from the rest. But now, weeks blur together in a way you don't even notice while it's happening. If you think back to your childhood, at least in my case, what stood out to me usually wasn't the big events. It's the small, random fragments that somehow stayed intact for no reason. I remember sitting in the backseat of my dad's car, staring out the window as it was raining and watching the water pellets merge on the window as the rain kept on pouring. The feeling of summer air right after school ended. Staying up too late on a school night watching videos or playing games while the house was completely quiet. Completely unaware of how big everything felt at that age. Back then, life felt slower because I felt like my brain was actually absorbing it. Everything was novel. Everything was new. Every year came with different people, different places, different versions of yourself. Your mind had no choice but to pay attention because everything carried weight simply because it was unfamiliar. I've started to find that adulthood doesn't really work like that. It slowly turns into repetition without you realizing it. You're forced to wake up around the same time, check the same apps, take the same routes, thinking about the same responsibilities, and having more or less the same kinds of conversations, at least for 8 to 9 hours in a day. And eventually, your brain starts compressing days together because, from its perspective, not much is changing. That's why a random week from when you were 13 can feel sharper in your memory than entire months from last year. I also think that's why nostalgia gets heavier over time. Not because the past was perfect, but because certain periods had a kind of emotional density to them. You can almost feel them when you remember them. Like the emotions you felt when you listened to music for the first time, or like a song in 2013 for the first time, or the taste of a food that you were just trying out, whether it was good or bad, the people, the routines, the version of you that existed in that environment. Recently, I felt like my weeks, months, and recent years don't always feel like that. Sometimes I try to think back and it's just blurry. Not empty, just compressed, like a time lapse instead of individual moments. And then, there are those small moments that suddenly make time feel real again. Calling your parents and noticing something subtle in their voice you didn't hear before. Visiting home and you realize your dad has more gray hair than you remember, or your mom looks slightly shorter in a way that you can't really unsee. Seeing friends you used to talk to every day turn into people that you now catch up with every few months if you're even lucky to reconnect. Even catching yourself in the mirror and realizing you don't look the same way as the version of you still living in your head. The strange part is internally you don't really feel that different. Most people still feel mentally closer to who they were a few years ago than what the calendar says they should feel like. So there's a mismatch between internal experience and external change that makes time feel kind of unreal, like it's happening faster to everything around you than it is to you. And honestly, I think modern life makes this even stronger, because we're rarely fully present anymore. There's usually a part of your attention split somewhere else. There's notifications, stress, responsibilities, background thoughts, and the sense that there's always something waiting after this moment ends. So days get lived, but not always fully registered. And then suddenly, I'm looking up and I realize that a year has passed. What makes it even harder to digest is how much only becomes meaningful in hindsight. There are entire phases of life that you didn't think much of at the time end up becoming the ones you miss the most later. High school summers, dinners with your family where nothing special happened, late night conversations that didn't feel important until they were gone for good, walking around with friends before anyone had real responsibilities. Those were the periods of life where everything felt normal until normal changed. At the time, I didn't realize that those moments were limited. I just assumed they'll keep repeating in the same way, but eventually they don't. And I think that's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. Time feels faster because fewer moments fully land anymore. Routine and familiarity turns life into autopilot. Your brain becomes efficient, and efficiency is great for survival, but in the sense of time, it kind of makes years feel like they're collapsing into each other. But then something small might break that pattern. Maybe it's a conversation that goes deeper than expected late at night. Maybe it's a drive where the music just hits right and your mind finally quiets down. Maybe the next time you sit with your family and you suddenly realize, without any big dramatic reason, that this exact version of the moment will never exist again. Or maybe you just hear an old song and you're instantly transported into a different version of yourself. Those moments feel slower. Not because time necessarily changed, but because you re-entered it, you kind of re-experience it. You're actually there and present again instead of moving through it on autopilot. At some point, almost everyone looks around and quietly wonders where all the time go. Almost everyone misses versions of life they didn't fully realize they were living while they were happening. But I don't think the answer is to try and turn every moment into something special. Because realistically, life can't be lived like that. Most days are always going to be ordinary. Routine is unavoidable, and that's just how life works. But I think the honest realization that I've come to is this: time doesn't speed up because life matters less. It speeds up because familiarity stops asking us to notice it. And maybe growing older is just learning slowly that the moments we remember most were never always the biggest ones. They were just the ones where, for a brief second, we were actually present while they were happening. Thanks for watching, Rardo, and I'll see you in the next one.